Test, test. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're about 5 minutes from the start of the panel discussion on the acquisition workforce. Ask you to please come on down, find a seat, and silence your phones at this time. And as a reminder, before we get started, at the end of the panel discussion, microphones will be available for questions from the floor. And we also ask you to rate the panel in the West app at the conclusion before you go to lunch. Thank you. Oh, no, he's in the middle. Got it. Okay. Okay. You want to wait a second? All right, got 3 minutes.
That is a very good piece of information to have.
Hi, Mike. You know Tom Oswald? He's my neighbor across the water. We have houses on opposite sides of the water.
Enjoying himself?
He is. You know, he built his house to look like a coast guard station. It's beautiful. I refuse to build my house to look like a naval ship. It's white with a red flagpole. Flagpole in the front, white with a red roof.
It's a lot of work going out every morning.
He was the one who was just in time.
Yes, they told me. Oh, there it is. I had a tracker on this.
Excellent.
Hey, this is cutting it close.
Second half.
On-time delivery.
Sir, how are you?
Thanks for standing up something the second half for us. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Thanks. Bigger than ever before. Tell Pete that. Shortney and Roto arriving. All set, sir? All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the first panel session of Wednesday. What is the acquisition workforce doing to better deliver warfighting capability the fleet needs to win at speed and scale at a cost we can afford? I'm Bill Hamblett from the Naval Institute. It's my pleasure to introduce the moderator of this morning's panel, Vice Admiral Kevin McCoy, United States Navy retired, former commander of Naval Sea Systems Command, and now President of Government Operations for BWXT. Admiral McCoy, over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll do a short bio for the folks up here. But when Pete Daly asked me to come out here and moderate this panel. I said, how could I not? I spent 5 years as the NAVC commander, then went up to Canada for 8 years and had to build a shipyard and then build big ships and do several ship designs. And I was cautioning against requirements overreach. So it's a hint on my first question to the Canadian government because of what I saw here in the U.S. And now 2 years, for the last 2 years, I've been building reactors and reactor plant equipment for the submarines and aircraft carriers for our Navy and at the DOE site. So again, you know, I'm on the other side of the table, you know, for the last 10 years from where I was as a SysCom commander. So, you know, when Pete asked me to do this, I said, got to do it. Great, you know, great opportunity to reconnect back. And I'll just say, I think this is just an unbelievable opportunity to have the 5 of these admirals up here that are serving today. I know when I was back at NAVC, we were spending 25% of the Navy's budget. This was 10 years ago. And so up here today for just the Navy's probably 50% of the Navy's, somewhere around that, of the Navy's budget in very tight times that these gentlemen up here control. And all of it, most of it, aside from, you know, organic capability at the depots and all, but most of it is put out to industry. And so it's great to see so many folks here interested in what we say here. But let me just introduce first. I'll start with Bill Galinas. Now, I don't really need his bio because he worked for me in several jobs. You know, Bill was, you know, strong shipboard tours at sea. And when I got to know him, he was LPD 17 program manager during very tough years. And just look at how that program has evolved. And then, you know, we sent Bill down to the Gulf Coast shipyard to run that soup ship down there when we had some problems. And then we took Bill and we put him in the maintenance business at Norfolk. So, you know, between his shipboard time, his acquisition time, his time on the waterfront, I'd say, you know, a great position to be. Certainly to be leading NAVC at this point. You know, Admiral Chevy here to my right, Nav Air, you know, test pilot, you know, strong sea tours, flying. He served as vice commander of Naval Air System, several program offices, and, you know, again, a guy who strong on the combat side, moving up into the acquisition side, and then leading a big part of the Navy's future. And then Admiral Small, he's the local boy right here from San Diego, Navy Information Warfare Systems Command again. I'd also say he gets the 200-pound brain award for this panel. He's got a doctorate in physics, which I would not have been able to do. But again, strong time at sea, program offices. I'd also say I got to know Doug a little bit, my NAVC time, when he was dealing with the J Crew, the counter IED installs over in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I went over there and saw that effort, keeping so many of our soldiers alive. So Doug, another great addition to this panel. I told General Walsh that my wife's whole side of the family is Marine Corps, so I'm Marine Corps friendly. The General, again, a pilot, a test pilot, amphibious warfare school. Lots of tours with Marine Corps light attack helicopters. Fleet Readiness Center ran that, so he knows the maintenance business as well as the acquisition business. And he's just into his first year at Marine Corps SysCom, so another great addition. And then Admiral Jacoby, I was just telling Admiral Jacoby, one of my good neighbors up in Kittery, Maine, it was one of his predecessors. But again, strong tours at sea, followed by acquisition tours, Coast Guard Academy graduate, and now running, and I guess he's got, I would say the Coast Guard job, if you still have the aviation side, yeah, so he's like Nav Air, he's like Nav Air and Nav Sea, and I think also you have the facilities, and so he's like the ultimate SysCom for the Coast Guard. So again, another great addition to the panel. So the way we're going to do this is I've prepared some questions. Some of them the SysCom commanders might think are a little unfair because I do have some inside information, and then we're going to do a little bit of that, make sure each one gets to answer a question, and then really, you know, want to turn it over to you folks. You know, I've been in industry for 10 years, so I certainly have questions that you know, some of them are embedded in here, but questions that you have. We've got workforce development issues, we've got contract issues, we've got budget issues, we've got all of that stuff. Looking to hear, coming out of COVID, looking to hear from you, and that's what's going to make this session really rich, is getting a lot of input from the audience. So without further ado, I'm going to turn to my good friend Bill Galinas here, Admiral Galinas, with the first question. And if you see some of the stuff I lived through 10 years ago in the question, there's a reason for that. So I'd say we have several great examples of requirements overreach in our recent history in the Navy. Both Seawolf and Zumwalt were planned to be 30-plus ship classes, but both were truncated at 3 due to costs. LCS chased 40-plus knot speed, and the ships were developed with overly complex propulsion plants, which caused problems in the fleet. We are now working plans for SSNX and the follow-on surface combatant to replace DDG-51 class. Given the increasing focus on the national debt and the need to build ships in greater number, is the acquisition workforce having the get real internal discussions with the requirements community about affordability and what constitutes too much risk in the current environment? Please give an example if you can. So, Bill, over to you.
That was an easy one. Hey, no, Admiral, thanks for the opportunity to be here. For the Naval Institute, thanks for putting this on. This is a great event. I just, having the opportunity to watch how this has really matured and grown over the last several years, to what it is today. It really is a true honor to be here. So thanks for the opportunity. But the question on requirements overmatch, and Admiral McCoy kind of hit it right on the Zumwalt, right? So, and I was involved in that program early on as we were kind of coming through the end of the requirements phase, and you can see that the requirements and the technology just didn't match up, and we're living through that today. And then the other thing is the mission requirements change, right? I mean, this was built as a long-range land attack destroyer. That mission really is no longer relevant per se in what we're doing today. And so we're in the process right now really taking those 3 ships and almost converting them to a new mission set that everybody's familiar with as we look to put a hypersonic strike missile capability on that platform. But where that dialogue is really active today, as was mentioned, is on the next generation surface combatant. Okay, and we have got to get that right for the Navy and for the country. And if you look at the last, I'll say, 15 years or so on surface construction, and the 2 programs that were mentioned, Zumwalt and the Littoral Combat Ship. Both of those programs really did not play out and meet the expectations and the mission set requirements that were initially envisioned. So what are we doing to kind of get after that? Well, if you look right now at what the team is doing with the frigate that's starting construction up in Marinette, Wisconsin, okay, I think that's a real good example of trying to find the right balance between mission requirements, capabilities, and even a hull form and a platform that was previously built, and really leveraging off that. Now, the Constellation class frigate's going to look a little bit different than the Italian design to kind of incorporate and accommodate the U.S. Systems and some of the equipment that we have on board. But you're taking a proven design that's been built, it's been put to sea. We're modifying it somewhat to meet our requirements, and right now we're generally on plan. Clearly, just getting started in the construction phase, but there's a heavy lift. There's a lot of work in front of that team to get that ship built, tested, and then delivered to the fleet. So that's one area where I think we've kind of taken the lessons learned from the LCS, from Zumwalt, and incorporated that into a current ship design. I would look at at what we've done on the Ford-class carrier. Okay, another one where when that ship was delivered, I would say that kind of was almost at the upper limits, if you will, in terms of balance and requirements and capabilities. And what that team has done over the last 2 years, with everything from getting the stabilizing the electrical plant, the elevators, the launch system on there. Just a lot of great work. Very successful shock trials last year. A very successful kind of initial operational deployment last fall up to the North Atlantic. And, she's coming through her last, essentially a little bit of a fitting out maintenance availability before we really turn her over to the fleet and get her into the operational cycle. And I will tell you, I think, for all, and I know there's probably many in this audience that have been part of that program, that platform is going to be a game changer when we get her into the fleet. So, some really, really good work. So there's a couple of examples where, I think we did find the right balance. One maybe a little bit more mature in terms of the carrier, the frigate. We've still got a lot of work to do there. The next one coming down the pike is is what comes behind the DDG 51, and that platform right now is just we're kind of out of Schlitz, so to speak, in terms of hull volume. We've upgraded the HM&E capability a little bit to incorporate the new Spy 6 radar and the new weapons going on that platform. But we do need kind of the next generation, especially if we're looking at a hypersonic capability on the destroyers. Our challenge working with the resource sponsor is to kind of keep the requirements in check there. So a couple of examples where I think we've taken the lessons learned from previous programs, incorporated into what we're doing today, and then that ongoing discussion with the next destroyer is going to be key. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it was very, very good. Appreciate those examples, Bill. Let me ask the same of Admiral Chevy on the Nav Air side.
Good morning, and thanks for having me up here. Pete, this morning I thought that panel was fantastic. I'm not sure if Admiral Zortman's here. I thought it was a really good panel. I do think we need to have the combined industry-government panel for next year, so we can kind of do point-counterpoint for the discussions this morning. Hey, a little bit of background, and I'll get to the question here. I've been in the job a little over a year. When I first took over, somebody very close to me, my mom, asked a very simple question: what does NavAir do? And it took me a little while. And if you ask 10 different people, you're probably going to get 11 different answers. Here's the way I've boiled it down. NavAir is in the business of naval aviation. And our business is to deliver the warfighting capability the fleet needs to win at a cost we can afford. To deliver the warfighting capability to enable the warfighters, our sons and daughters, to execute their missions successfully and return home safely. So all of my questions, or all the answers from today, will be bounded and aligned to those messages, to my North Stars for NavAir. Naval aviation has been on a journey. Many of you heard about the Hornet recovery. And if you think back to the keys to the success of Hornet recovery, there's probably 3 or 4 key points that were foundational that I'll address with the requirements question here. First, we set a target. We didn't say improved readiness. We said we needed 341 Super Hornets that are mission capable. For years, we were saying improved readiness, and we were getting what we were getting. When we set a target, first point, the second thing is we baseline where we were. Take the time to determine the root cause of your current performance. If you have an hour to save the world, take 55 minutes to define the problem. Define the problem. The next thing we did was we put in plans, pulled levers with specific outcomes that will allow us to achieve our North Star of 341. So we're doing that on availability across all the TMSs, and it's working very well. All the mission capability rates are going up across all of our TMSs. We're holding people accountable. They all have targets. They all outbrief to myself and to the air boss. It's working very well. Affordability, our second North Star for NavAir, we're doing the same thing. The time and cost to develop, integrate, test, and field capability is too much. So what is the root cause of that? What levers can we pull to have a delta outcome? And we're trying to take $2 billion out of the system to reinvest into capability for the warfighter. When I asked a question on capability, and this is about lanes, and if you think about the NavAir lane, the FRC commanders and the NOC commanders report to me, the PEOs don't, OpNav doesn't, they're all over the place. But if our North Star is to deliver the warfighting capability the fleet needs to win, that is our why, then we all have to be in each other's lanes. So for the requirements perspective, we're doing the exact same thing. The same thing we did on Hornet readiness, the same thing we're doing on affordability, we're doing that with capability. What is the capability that the fleet needs in capacity and capability. When do they need it, and how much is it going to cost? Define that up front, get everybody on the same sheet of music, and then we execute towards that. Right now, we're getting what we get when we get it for whatever it costs. So let's define the end state, let's define the North Star, and work it back. So that's a partnership with N9, N98, with the PEOs, with ASN, with the NOx, everyone's in, and industry, so we can drive to that end state.
Appreciate that. Let me ask the same question of the Marine Corps. I'm not as close to the Marine Corps, obviously, General, but you see examples of requirements overreach, and what is the Marine Corps doing about it?
Thanks for the question. I think, first of all, thanks for the opportunity to be up here with our fellow SysCom commanders and really to address industry and talk to our partners in industry, because I think that is the key to all this is partnerships. With industry, with our requirements generators, with the fleet, with our, all of the elements of our partnership. So with regards to requirements overreach and requirements transparency, I think that partnership really is important. Understanding what the fleet needs, being realistic with what we can deliver as a team with our SysCom, our PEOs, and our industry partners. So that requires us to be transparent with our requirements, requires industry to be transparent with what they are capable of delivering and when. On the Marine Corps side, as we look at cost, schedule, performance, we're really leaning into schedule right now, accelerating our capabilities, our Force Design 2030 capabilities into our fleet. So obviously that involves trade-offs with requirements, whether it's capabilities, capacity, sustainment, and our job as a SysCom is to provide good data to those requirements generators or requirements owners as to what those trades can be, so they can make well-informed trades and ultimately get those capabilities out to our Marines more quickly.
Yeah. How about from the Coast Guard perspective?
Yes, sir. So, you know, Nav Air and Nav Sea covered major parts of it, so I'll try to bring in a different lens. I think part of what we sometimes see as requirements overreach or scope creep is how we've structured the programs. At least in the Coast Guard, we have a very waterfall approach. You know, the ships we're replacing were built back in the 50s or 70s, and in that time we were able to build probably 12 ships in 9 years, and there was a clean break between acquisition and sustainment. What we're finding now as we build the national security cutters, the fast response cutters, about to splash the first offshore patrol cutter and the polar security cutter going into production here soon, is sometimes programs never end. There's no good clean break between acquisition and sustainment. And then our siloed programs, it's hard to make good system level budget decisions when each program has its own allocation of funding, and there's no overriding pot to do system level upgrades. So as these ships come to their 20-year mark for national security cutters, I don't see an end to the acquisition work that is being done on there. So for the first time in the Coast Guard's history, we will not have this break between acquisition and sustainment. And I see them rolling right into system upgrades, obsolescence management. So my challenge is to set up acquisition processes that can respond timely enough for those, you know, mostly C5, but some HM&E obsolescence issues, and be able to respond, you know, close to the year of funding, not 5 to 7 years out in a budget process. So we're standing up programs that have an overarching portfolio, probably run 5 to 7 projects inside that program, so that we can prioritize near real time and spin up programs to deal with obsolescence, instead of, you know, letting ships go out into sustainment and have multiple baselines of software and hardware obsolescence that wasn't you know, brought to a clean handoff to sustainment. So I think we're looking at programs kind of with an old mentality. We think that you can just build a ship and then go out and run it. And I think the reality today is that what might look like scope creep or requirements growth is actually just the reality that these systems will never be done, and you need to keep fielding new variants of them.
Thank you. maybe Doug, close this question out for us from your perspective on information warfare.
Sure, and I'd like to just kind of poke back at the premise of the question a little bit, if that's permitted, but, you know, the idea that it's requirements overreach, I think is not quite correct. I mean, I think in the examples that we talk about with Zumwalt and LCS, we have to remind ourselves that the world in which we dreamed up those platforms was much different than it is today. We had zero competition on the seas. And so with a long-range gun, you could go anywhere with impunity. We didn't need things like submarines. We decided we didn't need things like Aegis because there were no air forces to try to attack our units at sea. LCS, while we talk about the speed and things like that, the overriding concern for LCS was the price per hull, because we needed a lot of them to handle the presence. And so I think the thing that we should learn from that is that we need to approach these major decisions when it comes to force structure with a lot of humility. The world changed and changed very rapidly, and so we had to do things like restart destroyer lines and start to get back to how are we going to incrementally add the capability that we have to the ships that we have. You know, how many of us would have predicted a punishing artillery battle in Europe going on today? And what are the decisions that we're going to make in our forces that are going to, you know, be changed by world events coming up? To me, the biggest learning is the modularity, scalability, things like that that we need to build in, which aren't traditional concepts and requirements, and we're trying to shave down to the very minimum that we need to buy. Thank goodness we did price in some capacity and size and scale into DDG 1000, because now we have a lot of room to be able to do things like put CPS in there and things like that. So those are my thoughts.
All right, thank you, Admiral. Let me turn to the workforce. 2 weeks ago, I pulled down a news article with a picture of Admiral Galinas on it, saying workforce woes are top strategic challenge for Navy, Admiral says. I think Bill's familiar with that article. But here's my question. Coming out of the pandemic, industry is struggling to retain and hire the necessary personnel with skills and the numbers required. My company alone saw a 10% attrition last year. The defense industry-wide is having this problem. In fact, it's a national problem in heavy manufacturing. Not only is it a raw numbers issue, but it's also an experience issue, which will drive higher costs as the new workers are trained. How much attention is this getting inside the acquisition community? What is the acquisition community doing? And are we leveraging other parts of the government for training and initiatives like funding and initiatives like that? So I think this really it goes across the entire defense industry, and then probably a question for each one of these admirals. So, Bill, since you popped up in the newspaper, how about we'll start with you on that one?
Yeah, thank you, sir. Yeah, so I'd tell you, and I've told my team this, I think the people part of our business, it really is our number one strategic challenge, okay? And, you know, whether you're working in government or private industry, you know, our attrition last year was easily 3 to 4%, in some cases higher in some parts, some places maybe a little bit lower, higher than average. And, you know, and that's across the board. And I don't care what area you work in, whether it's in our business functions, so that's, you know, finance or contracting or HR, our technical side, so our white-collar engineers and technicians, all the way down into the shipyards and our field activities for folks that work, you know, our trades and even our project managers that manage projects on the waterfront. You know, we're out. You know, the news is that NAVSEA is hiring. We're all hiring. You know, that's kind of the message. Going forward, I will tell you, are we doing enough about it? I would tell you, I don't think so. Okay, I really don't believe so. And you know, I'll just tell you now, inside our shipyards, and trying to keep our skilled trades and mechanics. Okay, you know, you don't have to be the best paying company in town, but you better be competitive. Okay, and I think we're losing a little bit of that competitive edge in what it's taking just to get that package through the bureaucracy of our HR system inside the government is just amazing. I mean, you know, I kind of looked at, you know, one of our private shipyards just up the road from one of our public shipyards, and they were able to make a change, you know, just in the pay scale overnight almost, okay, over a weekend. You know, it's taken us months to be able to do that. Now, I will tell you, you know, pay is not everything, right? I mean, it's got to be the total package. And, you know, the compensation package working in the government versus in private industry, it is different. But like I said, it's got to be competitive, and you got to give people coming into that job, whether it's, again, you know, in one of our field activities or our headquarters, you know, an opportunity, a path that they see forward, that they can improve, you know, from a financial perspective, but also from a learning perspective. Okay, that's in my mind, you know, just as important. And if you get people in and they're learning both in a personal and professional manner, and they feel that they're value added, they're part of a team that's producing, you know, making a difference for the Navy, and that goes a long way. I'll tell you, that goes a long way. And across NAVSEA, okay, and I don't care if you're talking about headquarters or out of our field activities, the resonance with the NAVSEA mission, okay, in terms of supporting the fleet and what we do as a Navy is very, very strong. And so I will tell you, I'm very high on the workforce that we have. It's an area that we need to continue to focus on to, you know, to recruit and to train and then retain that workforce once we get them inside the gate. So really high on the people we have, but we got more work to do to kind of continue to build that workforce and then retain the talent that we have.
Thank you, Admiral. Admiral Chevy?
Oh, so there's a theme here. We go in order. All right, since Doug didn't answer the question he got asked, I'm going to go off script as well. The Super Bowl call, a good call or bad call of the holding. Any Eagles fans out there? All right. Hey, before I took over, I went and saw Secretary Gertz. And he said lots of things to me. One thing that kind of stuck with me is like, Chebs, you can do one or two things when you go down to Navarre. You can either reorg or you can get things done. Pretty powerful statement. We had just gone through a massive reorg down at Navarre, and I was not going to do a reorg. But I was going to talk to the workforce and let them evolve to what we needed to be, whether it's telework, whatever it's going to be, whatever the organizational construct is going to look like. So from an industrial-based concern, as we talk about capability, affordability, and availability as our North Stars, and how we modernize the way we develop, integrate, test, and field capability, the team's working feverishly, and we have North Star programs. If you think Future Vertical Lift, you think EXX, you think NGAD, for those to develop and field on time in an affordable fashion from development as well as sustainment, how do we modernize attract and retain and modernize the way we develop, integrate, and test and field capabilities? I've talked to many of you. I've gone out to industry and, you know, from a digital engineering, digital sustainment, that whole digital thread. We have work to do there at Navarre. I'm looking at my team right here who's leading that effort. We are not there. Here's what I know I am. I am not the smartest person in this room. So my ask to industry, my ask to the folks in this room here, if you have lessons learned from advancing your workforce so we can deliver and field the next generation of warfighting capability, Navarre is all ears. Thank you.
Thank you, Admiral. From Marine Corps perspective on the industrial workforce and as well as your own workforce, General?
Yeah, thanks, sir. So, yeah, we at Marine Corps Systems Command, just like Admiral Chevy said, our mission is to deliver capabilities to our Marines. And we generally think of that as hardware, software, IT systems, all those types of things that we deliver for our Marines. And that is our mission, but our center of gravity really is our workforce. It's the people that do that. We're not going to get any of that done without our government workforce and our industry partners and their workforce, their acquisition workforce. So as we go around, and Sergeant Major Goodyear and I go around and talk to our workforce, we look for opportunities to improve our recruitment. So we're always out there looking to find new folks who want to come in and join the Marine Corps team, join the Department of Navy team, to deliver those capabilities. That's really what attracts folks. We don't pay the best. It's our HR system has some challenges, but when you look at what they get to do as part of our acquisition workforce, that's really inspiring. That's what gets people in the door with us and makes them stay with us. It's overcoming the challenges with our antiquated IT systems, some of the challenges we have with getting people in the right facilities to have the right kind of conversations for some of our higher classification capabilities and the work we're doing. They stay despite all those challenges because they love serving the Marine Corps and serving the Department of the Navy. So that's what we pitch when we go out there. It works. We get people. We have an awesome workforce, both inside the government, organically, and with our industry partners that continue to provide products for our Marines.
Thank you. Maybe Admiral Small, just comment in your area on what you're seeing as workforce issues.
Sure. You know, like everyone, there's attrition, but you know, it's at least for NAVWAR, our workforce is our number one priority, and it starts with things like culture and trying to build a place where people, frankly, can't wait to come to work. The foundations of treating every individual with dignity and respect, and talking about that and making it part of the overriding culture. Where people can contribute from day one to an incredible mission, a mission that's bigger than anything that anyone can do on their own. I mean, we're in competition with like Apple. Apple is literally moving a plant into northern San Diego. I mean, that's who our up until the recent turndowns, there were companies that would, you know, you could bring your dogs to work and they would feed you all your meals and all that. That's who we're in competition with. And so our mission is amazing. We have a whole part of our strategic vector effort that's all about making sure that all of our workforce is in touch with that mission, because that is the reason why they want to come and join us. And so, you know, we certainly all of the work going on in, you know, recruiting and the hiring process that Admiral Galinas talked through. A lot of that comes down to leadership of you know, from hiring manager to, you know, line supervision all the way through. Retaining, rewarding, promoting, all those, you know, just fundamental blocking and tackling of the HR side of our business. But really it comes back to, you know, those foundations of dignity and respect and a culture where people can't wait to come to work.
Thank you. How about from a Coast Guard perspective?
So the Coast Guard doesn't have a dedicated acquisition workforce, so we draw from the operators, the engineers, you know, all across the Coast Guard. So we have a deep pool of leaders, and we get to benefit from some of the initiatives that the Coast Guard in general is taking. For example, we're starting to bring in people mid-career in certain rates where we don't have to grow that expertise from, you know, an ensign or a seaman. We can bring in cyber specialists or cooks or different rates mid-career. So that's one idea that'll benefit the acquisition community. My focus is, I feel like the governance pendulum has swung really far to the right, where the acquisition program managers have layers and layers of restrictions placed on them. And we need to bring that back a little bit to make it a balance of the challenge of acquisition, being able to see, you know, the results of their work, but also some autonomy to make tough decisions down at the program manager level. We've got examples of achieving that in different places in the Coast Guard, where we've structured product line managers with a lot of levers that they can pull to succeed in sustaining ships and aircraft. And my focus is applying that to the acquisition community and getting some empowerment down from the DHS level down through the Coast Guard level to the program managers that are making the decisions. And I feel like, you know, if you make that job both challenging and rewarding and fun, you know, we can draw the best people into the acquisition community.
Yeah, I would say I heard all of that. Maybe there'll be some questions from the folks out in the audience here. You know, I'll tell you what I see. You know, we make big, heavy, round things for the United States Navy, and our forging suppliers and casting houses and other machining companies that we have historically relied on for years, they're struggling with labor, and I think it's a national problem where young folks in this country don't want to build things and don't want to weld and don't want to machine, and I think at some point that's going to really become a national security issue for the country, and maybe some of you out there can think of some questions. I know we're doing some things on the government level to try and help get folks into the trades, but I think that's one of those things that as a country, we at the national, really a national congressional whole of government level, need to encourage young folks into fundamental manufacturing trades. I don't know if anybody wants to chime in any comments on that. Admiral Chevy? Oh, there we go.
This work? Yeah. I thought you were asking for questions, and I've been dying to ask this one. So, first of all, Emmett Chevy, I think the guy that did the holding said he did the holding, so it's a pretty clear. And I'm not a fan of either team. So fundamentally, my question's about building an airplane for 3 services that have pretty divergent requirements. And I'm talking about the F-35. My understanding is we spent over $45 billion in R&D on that airplane, and that number may be increasing. And my data's dated back to when I was on active duty. Does it really make sense to have one airplane for the 3 different services? I don't think we spent anywhere near that much on the AV-8B to make it go like this. Does it make sense to keep doing it this way?
Is that for Bill Galinas?
It's actually Doug Small.
I'll take that.
Yeah, so you're asking for a 2-hour conversation on the pros and cons of a joint program office. We've gone down the F-35 joint program office journey, and we are where we are right now. I'm telling you today, from a Navy perspective, and it was just an article not too recently regarding to F-35 capability and readiness that we have on our fleet today. So we are in a good place with F-35 right now. We need to continue to invest in that platform going forward, and we will do that. The question with regards to, should it all be one platform? Because trust me, if we have 3 different platforms, the sustainment costs are not shared, everything else goes up. So methodically, up front, look at the requirements, where there's overlap, where there's not overlap, and then kind of run the numbers to see what makes sense kind of going forward. We're going through other examples right now where we want to do something differently than we did with F-35. I've cautioned my team to make sure that we run the numbers and run the business case analysis to make sure that it makes sense. With getting capability out there at a certain time, at a certain cost, certain performance, let's figure out what the best solution set looks like.
Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. Yes, sir.
Gentlemen, good morning. Diego Laje with Signal Magazine. If you talk to many of the small guys behind me in this room, in the booths, there's a theme, and the theme is that as they supply the big guys who are actually the contractors, right, the big companies, they never get to talk to the end user. I mean, people in your teams. Their complaint is that they actually do the work that the bigger companies integrate and become the final system, but they have a lot of back and forth because they're unable to speak to people in the actual teams as there is a company in between. And this is just for production. They don't want to sell anything or, get the bigger company out of the way. And it's a theme that you find if you go talk to the people in booths and walking around behind me. I'd like to know, first, if you're aware of this, and second, what are you guys doing with your teams to try and find a solution?
Anybody want to jump on that hand grenade?
I'll take that.
Who?
Sure. Yeah.
All right.
So I can think of one example. You're right, the Coast Guard, and I'm sure DOD in the past is sometimes gone to big contractors and said, hey, I need an end-to-end solution for this, this mission need. And that probably elevates the program to a really high level, to a really large contractor. I know that in the Coast Guard, we are looking at doing some homework up front, figuring out what, for example, data ecosystem, what protocols and standards we want to use to integrate our systems. And then we'll be able to go out to smaller vendors and say, I need a sensor that can plug into my predetermined network here. So we have examples of end-to-end solutions, and now the new programs we're standing up will be, in fact, if you listen to the Project Minerva brief yesterday from the Coast Guard, the whole focus of that is to, again, do some homework inside the government and then go out for many smaller sensors to plug into that network or vendors to integrate our data. So I can tell you there is a acknowledgement and a focus on bringing in smaller companies.
Yeah.
Hey, 202-781-0100, okay? I'm not kidding. Call me. We spend a lot of time talking with industry, and I realize, I got to tell you, we get that very often, okay, how difficult it is to kind of break inside the government. My staff's back there cringing. They're like, oh my gosh, what's he doing, right? But, I mean, opening that dialogue between, our small business and the Navy and Navy leadership and the operators is absolutely key, okay? And we look for opportunities to do that. That said, when we have those discussions, sometimes it'll be, hey, I need you to go talk with this company or that company, to kind of get them into the process. So that's number one. Number two, I would tell you, it's something that we've kind of looked at and reflected on within NAVSEA, is we're probably not the most user-friendly organization around. I'll be honest with you, okay? And so we're trying to do that, whether it's within our tech codes. Our warfare centers are an incredible input, okay, for small businesses to get their ideas kind of into the system. So, and the warfare centers, as you know, are throughout the country. So there's opportunities there. Even our shipyards and our regional maintenance centers, when it comes to, to ship maintenance and sustainment, okay, are good inputs. But it's an area that we've got to continue to work on, okay? So number one, open to the dialogue. It's an important part of what we do. And then number two, we realize we've got some challenges there that we're working on. So good question. Thank you.
Maybe move on to another question. You over here. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Paul Rosbold from Systems Planning and Analysis. You talked about a couple of shipbuilding programs that certainly seem to be challenging, DDG 1000, LCS. We also have seen some challenges in modernization. So cruiser modernization, at least from the outside looking in, did not appear to go particularly well. We're coming up on another one of those big modernization programs, DDG 2.0, which from a requirements perspective is absolutely necessary for our future force. So from an AFC perspective, and I target Admiral Galinas and to some degree Admiral McCoy, how do you keep those major modernization programs from becoming debacles?
Yeah, so let me just, on the cruiser mod program, I will tell you, the strategy that was developed for a number of different reasons, okay? And not to relive history. And in the end, it was probably not the best strategy, but it also wasn't well executed, okay, which got us to where we are today. And quite frankly, the cruisers right now, the material condition of those ships is just, they are in tough shape. Yep. And it's not the combat system and the C4I system. It's the hull, it's the infrastructure of the ship, and that's hard to get after. It can be done, but it costs a lot of money. The second part on your on the DDG mod program coming up, we are looking at that, and really kind of what we want to do is go after that more like an acquisition program, okay, where we're very, very kind of looking forward in terms of awarding that contract to, a small number of shipyards that we can continue to repeat that process from one hull to another to get learning, lessons learned, and things like that incorporated in. Okay, working with Doug Small and his team at NavWar for their part of it, Admiral Akano on the combat system side and the sensor side. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. So again, kind of rolling some of the lessons learned from previous modernization efforts and taking lessons learned from the acquisition programs on how we execute that program is the way we're going to get after it. Yeah.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Another question?
Kai Alberg, Washington State. In the late 30s, our political leadership decided that the world was becoming a more dangerous place, and in the 38 and 40 Navy Acts, we more than doubled the size of our pre-war Navy by the time we were in the war. Looking at today's industrial base, what is our ability to have a large ramp-up if our political leadership later this decade decided that 300 or 350 ships is actually not enough in today's environment? And what are the obstacles you see to increasing our production capacity if Congress were to be willing to write the checks for that?
Yeah, how about, I don't know, General, you want to talk from a Marine Corps standpoint?
Yeah, so obviously not in the shipbuilding business, but from the Marine Corps standpoint, as we look at the industrial base and their ability to ramp up, where we've seen it is more on the munitions side. As we've funneled munitions over to Ukraine, we work closely with the industrial base to try and refill our stocks and really ramp up our production rates to fill our stocks back up. Some of the challenges we've seen, biggest challenge we've seen is in just the facilities and the infrastructure to do that. So as we look forward, I think investment, shared risk, and investment into our infrastructure, tooling, and then our workforce, back to our previous conversation about workforce, making sure we have the folks in the industrial base that can support that ramp up in production.
Yeah, Chevy?
Yeah, hey, during this morning's discussion with the industry panel, there was a lot of discussion on partnerships. I didn't get up and ask a question, but if I had, I would have made a comment. The partnerships work when both sides are pulling towards the same goal. It does not work otherwise unless we do that. So from the industrial-based perspective, you know, you asked about the requirements North Star and the requirements overreach. I think, you know, to be fair and balanced, I think the U.S. Navy, I'll talk from a NAVAIR perspective, we got to give the signals, the consistent signals to industry so they can build that capacity. They're not going to, my sense, I don't want to put words in the industry's mouth. You're not going to build the capacity if there's no future business. So I think that it's both sides coming together, understanding kind of where we want to be in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, so we have the capacity we need to feel the capability that the fleet needs. Carl Thomas is off to the left here, 7th Fleet Commander. He has my personal email and my work email, and he talks to me about capability and capacity all the time. He is going to be on the front lines. So to make sure he has what he needs, his fleet has what they need so they can go execute their mission successfully and return home safely is our highest priority. I think from the Navy side, we have a little bit of work to do here to make sure we send a strong signal to industry of what we expect in the future.
Thank you, Admiral. Yes, sir.
Hi, gents. Boris Becker, one-time Giants fan. Question, kind of riffing on what Admiral Small was talking about with the change in the world. You know, look at space and the world of space. It used to be a gentleman's game. Now space is a very much contested environment, and the old way of doing business there isn't working. As a result, the new head of acquisition for space, Frank Calvelli, has kind of turned things on its head. He's come up with kind of a simple formula for making things go faster, get them better, just changing the way they're doing business in the space side, buying things that are existing, buying things that aren't fixed price. You can read it up. Simple formula. If you could have direction that's simple and clear from the head of acquisition for the Department of the Navy to give you the power to change how you're doing business, what would it be? It may not be the same. You can't buy commercial-based munitions or whatever, but if you could have those kinds of changes, the way that Frank has shaken up the space acquisition world, what would be those kinds of changes so that we're not looking back and saying we thought the world looked like this 15 years from now? Thanks.
Yeah. Anybody want to jump on that one? Doug?
So I would just say I don't know that we would need any changes from on high. I think that the systems that we have give us the flexibility where it can be a matter of will. I think on our side, what we need to do is make sure that we're getting architecture set to take advantage of things like that, like the commercial space proliferation is just, it's incredible. And, you know, there's nothing holding us back from making sure that our architectures can take advantage of that. And, you know, I think it's, you know, key to one of the reasons why we do these things, right, is to learn what are those next things that are coming so that we can be ready for them. But, you know, and I appreciate your opening part there. Space is another domain where, you know, we enjoyed a lot of freedom where now it's incredibly contested. And, but we have an opportunity there to really disrupt our thinking. And we're, at least in the Navy, we believe that we're in a place where we're at least keeping pace with the pace of technology there. And that's a good place to be.
Anybody else want to comment? Yeah, from the Coast Guard perspective?
I would. So if I was able to change one thing, I would change the ability to appropriate and authorize funding at a higher system level. I mentioned before we've got very siloed programs. So, all of you work in the commercial side and have context, in how we structure programs. I know that my focus in the future is going to be to authorize portfolios that can execute programs, so not tying the dollars to an exact asset class. And I think if we start that conversation and talk in those terms, a lot of the questions that were asked, midlife, modernizations and things like that, will be easier executed with that portfolio mentality of funding.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Okay, so we talk about retention, workforce. What are you doing to help us? And this is a question for all of you, to help the industry in those situations where we have, 5-year, 10-year contracts. We bid these contracts either for a fixed price, cost plus, either way. And we need to retain these people. We need to change our rates. We need to add more benefits. And it's going to change the cost to the government. But we can't. How are you helping us with our contracts so we can be funded to help retain and give the benefits we need to give to maintain our workforce to support the mission?
Yeah, I think the question, if I understand it, centers around the fact that many of the contracts we entered into did not anticipate 10% inflation and $5 gas and,
Exactly.
bidding wars for employees. So, yeah, anybody up here? One.
So I think, the answer to the question is in the question itself. I mean, we negotiate those things. I mean, we understand what's going on there, and certainly the underlying rates, the assumptions that went into it change, but it's, as far as it's a negotiation. It's not just a, hey, here we go. But I think you're seeing a lot of action on that front, at least from the department, because everybody recognizes rates are rising, and we understand that. I don't know your specific company or specific contractual concerns, and if they're with me, we can talk after. But in general, I mean, we understand there's a business relationship between us that has to be symbiotic.
I think those long-term contracts cut both ways for your workforce, because it does give you some stability, gives us some stability as we look at multi-years and 5- and 10-year contracts. So that gives you some stability, but it also introduces some risk to you, especially on a fixed price contract, obviously, where we'll have to talk about opportunities to negotiate economic price adjustments, those types of things, as those long-term contracts play out.
Yeah, certainly, we are in uncharted waters and haven't seen this level of inflation. And
I could almost see the point, though, that so we're no longer going to do long-term contracts to minimize your risk, and then that's going all the way the other way. So I guess it depends. Would be my best answer for you. Sorry, I know that's not a good one, but.
Thank you for the question. Yes, sir.
Hey, good morning, gentlemen. Carl Camasco from Dun & Bradstreet. Appreciate you being here. This conference represents a very thin sliver of the defense industrial base, and we've talked a little bit about some of the risks, right, that you've observed. But I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what your organizations are doing to incorporate acquisition intelligence to enable acquisition security, right? And what do I mean by that? I mean, across the businesses that supply your prime contractors, how comfortable are you with the risks that might be resident across the industrial base? Because, there's a number of ways to enumerate these risks and identify them and flag them, but do you have the information you need to identify that, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers, that supply chain risk illumination is satisfactory to your risk tolerance? Thank you.
Bill, you want to take that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, okay? And I will tell you, probably up until, I'll say a few years ago, at least within the NAVSEA portfolio and some of the contracts that we oversaw, which arguably are probably some fairly, some of the larger ones, right, with ship construction and whatnot, is we really relied on the primes to really oversee, the industrial base, and certainly the part of the portfolio that they dealt with, okay? I think what we have come to realize over time, and certainly the last couple of years has really borne this out, as we deal with the COVID pandemic and other things, is there are some fragilities deep down inside the the industrial base. Some of the, especially the smaller companies, and we've enlisted some networking tools and applications that are out there that allow you to really map the industrial base from some of your major prime contractors through the supply chain, and you start mapping that out, and you get down 4 or 5 levels deep, and you realize it's one small company that's building a particular part or has a particular capability that's feeding a couple of major suppliers, right? So that's an area that we really focus on. I will tell you, in our portfolio, I think who's kind of leading the charge on that is the folks in our team submarine effort, okay, and what they're doing with the submarine industrial base. So, using those kind of tools, we're expanding that across the broader NAVSEA enterprise. But that's one way that we're trying to get at that industrial base risk down at the lower levels that you talk about, which I think that's a good question, sir.
Thank you, Admiral.
Any other comments, Andrew?
I would just, oh, sorry. Yeah, I would just say too, when we talk about supply chain, we tend to talk about hardware and things like that. But I'll say the answer to the question is I'm never satisfied with where we are, and that it's really this eternal vigilance is absolutely required. And even in the software perspective, right? Because you can pick up some piece of code that's whoever developed it and everybody's using it, and it pulls libraries from some unsavory place that you didn't know about. So even in the software world, you have to trace that. You have to understand the entire supply chain of where that code is coming from, and then make sure that you're ready for when there are unsavory things that are going to be in there, that you can find it in time. So the security certainly on the hardware side, but even on the software and even firmware side as well.
General?
Yeah, that's one of the challenges we've had. It really is just supply chain visibility all the way down to the lowest tier suppliers, and identifying the risk, whether it's foreign involvement, whether it's single point failures like Admiral Cornelius was talking about, and then we have to do something about it. But what we've really had a challenge with is just seeing all the way down to that level and making sure that as we build contracts with industry, that we ask for that data, ask for that supply chain visibility, because that is, as you well know, that changes on a daily basis down at the lower levels, and just keeping up with that is really a challenge. We see it particularly in our legacy systems that we're trying to sustain, as those, we're not putting a lot of money into those programs, and those lower tier suppliers start drying up.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Rick Easton, retired surface warfare officer. Our threat doesn't look like it's going to mitigate anytime soon, certainly from a peer competitor perspective. And from an acquisition community, we've talked a lot in the past about total ownership costs, something that's probably hard to really put your hands around in an exact way. But we also talk about affordability, and certainly throughout my career, I saw many decisions made for near-term affordability that certainly didn't take into account the total ownership cost of that program. It seems to me that that piece of the vision is missing. If we're going to build a ship that is 14,000 tons, arguably at least 40% bigger by square foot or tonnage, that price seems like it's going to be a lot more. I know that some of the large surface combatant numbers are less to have a larger mix of lower end ships, but still we've got to have a certain number of ships to address that threat. And when you look again at the total ownership cost perspective, I think that's going to drive a lot of things. What's the vision in the material commands today on total ownership costs? How are you evaluating the risk of affordability trades in the near term vis-a-vis that thought process for the long term?
Here, I'll start. 3 North Stars: capability, affordability, and availability is what we're going after. From the affordability perspective, each one of the TMSs right now has a cost per flight hour, a cost per tail per year. So I know the fully burdened cost to fly each one of our platforms today. And we know what's driving those costs today. And then they have a projection 5 years out and 10 years out, and they go through a review once a month with myself and Airboss and what they're doing to get cost out of that system. Improve reliability, improve maintainability, improve training. There's multiple different things. Take the time to define the root cause of the problem and then attack it. That's current. You also kind of talked about the next generation of capability. The last time I was here, I kind of talked about this, and I said, for our future platforms, we're pretty good about performance requirements. But the sustainment and the affordability requirements, we're a little bit too silent from my perspective on those. So I've been talking to a lot of the industry partners here as we go forward with our next programs, whether it's Future Vertical Lift, it's EXX, it's NGAD, whatever it's going to be, next weapons. You know, what are the affordability targets that we're going to go after? And I'm working with the PEOs and OPNAV on that. To your point, I don't think it's an affordability trade-off. I think it needs to be an engineering trade-off early in a program. Because if we don't pay the price up front, the cost up front, you know, from a sustainment perspective, 80% of our cost will be in sustainment. We have that data in binders and binders and binders. So to make those hard decisions up front, but those are hard decisions. I can get a shiny new widget, or I can get a more reliable shiny new widget with a little bit less performance. That's a hard trade-off that we have, but we have to have that discussion if affordability is going to be our primary focus, which it is.
Bill, you want to comment on?
Yes, sir. Yeah, I think it's a really good question. So I offer a couple of different perspectives here. Number one, you know, within NAVC, what we've done, we've had this in the carrier world for a while. We did it with the submarine force as the alignment under one PEO of the program offices that oversee everything from, you know, design to construction to sustainment of that platform. And we're already seeing that make a difference is in our attack submarine branch with the Virginia class, which, you know, brings its own set of unique challenges as we build that class in different blocks, okay, and the amount of change that's incorporated from one block to the next. So, and then that's the same program office that's also now kind of, you know, starting the design work on the SSNX, right? So you're seeing those lessons learned kind of flow through that. We haven't gotten to that point on the surface side, principally because of just the sheer number and the different types of ships that we have. It just, you know, we haven't. We still have that separated out for a number of really good reasons there. But once you get the platform, you know, into service, that's an area I think we need some more focus on. And again, I'll go back to the surface side, just in terms of the variants that we have. And I'll just use the DDG 51 class. You know, the number of variants that kind of migrate into the platform over time. You know, as we have different programs, different PARMs, and in some cases even across different SysComs, you know, working, you know, integrating new capabilities. So we've got more work to do there, particularly on the surface side. I feel pretty good about where we're going on the carrier and the submarine side.
Thank you.
Yep. Doug?
I'd just add a perspective from PARM. If anybody knows what a PARM is, that's a pejorative term for people who install systems on ships and submarines. But I think one of the things that we've done really well is learn from mistakes in that regard, especially with respect to acquisition cost of ships, for example. A lot of times it's driven by putting, you know, say commercially furnished systems that then need to have an entire sustainment tail brought in to bear, where there's an existing government system with it already existing sustainment capability. So the frigate, for example, that Admiral Galinas talked about, one of the big examples there was we went toward government furnished systems to make sure that from a sustainment perspective, it's falling in on already existing things. And that's everything from how do we train sailors to supply of, you know, spare parts, et cetera, et cetera. So everything from networking systems, right? It does us no good to put a commercial network system on a ship that we cannot scan and patch and keep up to date. It may save acquisition costs. In the long run, it kills us, right? And so understanding that up front, I think we've done a pretty good job of learning and incorporating that into ship designs.
I would just add a Coast Guard perspective. We've struggled with understanding the total operating cost early enough in the acquisition to incorporate it into decisions. One thing we've done is stood up 2 new commands that are dedicated to developing, you know, doing the root cause failure analysis, developing the logistics packages for both surface and air assets, and having those under the acquisition program manager. Another piece of it is we're doing that work organically. In the past, we've asked shipyards and subcontractors to develop those maintenance requirements. And we find that getting the vendor furnished information early, doing that work in-house, we can get those answers quicker. So we have those data points as we're making acquisitions decisions to incorporate.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Yeah. George Blackwood, formerly NavAir, now NavWar. Like to hear insight on all of y'all's toughest, problems or challenges, and then separately, greatest areas of opportunity. Thanks.
Yeah, can you repeat the question?
Toughest problems that y'all have, and then greatest areas of opportunity.
You want to start?
I'll start. It may be an obvious one, but we're building ships, we're building aircraft, we're fielding software systems, and while ships and aircraft are very hard, the integrated solution to the Coast Guard's information flow problem, which we touched on in our Minerva brief yesterday, is probably one of the most difficult because it spans multiple, every aspect of the Coast Guard. It forces us to not go after individual solutions until we understand how they're going to knit together. And at least in my mind, that development of an architecture that we want to build to is one of our biggest challenges.
Yeah, I'd just say from the NAVSEA perspective, I think some of the challenges we have in the fleet sustainment area, private public sector are probably our biggest challenges, probably the areas for greatest opportunity. So.
From the Marine Corps Systems Command perspective, I'd say our biggest challenge is accelerating capabilities to our Marines. Force Design 2030, we're well funded and on our path to deliver those capabilities by 2030. But as we look at our pacing threat accelerating, we need to get those capabilities out to our Marines more quickly. So that's, I think, our biggest challenge. Our biggest opportunity is taking advantage of existing capabilities that are out there and integrating those in creative ways to deliver a capability to our Marines. And Nemesis is a great example of that, our Navy Marine Corps Expeditionary Ship Interdiction System. So took an existing Naval Strike Missile, put it on a JLTV, and now we have an expeditionary capability that'll help the naval force interdict sea lanes. So I think that's our biggest opportunity, is to continue innovating and integrating that way.
So I'd say in terms of biggest challenges, our part in on-time delivery of ships and submarines, aircraft carriers from availabilities, it's a huge priority for us in the Navy. As far as opportunities, I think one of the things that we've seen in trying to bring things like digital platforms to ships is, as well as even some of the efforts you may have read about things like scriptathons with sailors. We have an amazing talent pool out there that, with modern methods of software delivery, that we can tap into sailors and Marines who are just absolutely expert in their field, and so we have a real opportunity to tap into that. I think there's some exciting stuff coming up on that.
Great question. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just finish it up with the way I started it. The North Star that we had was deliver the warfighting capability. The fleet needs to win when they need it at a cost we can afford. We're not achieving that North Star. I have many issues that I have to deal with or work through at the NavAir level. Industry, we need help here. Please deliver what we have you on contract for from a cost, schedule, performance perspective. We all have to focus on, no kidding, what's important to us. It's the fleet warfighter, making sure what they need is what they have. And right now, we're not achieving that.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Maria Posada, Don, Operational Energy, aligned under ASN EINE and ASN RDA. With increased capability, there comes an increase in operational energy that's required both in fuel and electrons. Just wondering your approach to understanding that energy demand, the aggregate energy demand, and what you're doing to ensure that it's supportable from an energy perspective, understanding that we have a fixed amount of logistical ships. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Anybody want to address that one?
So,
go ahead, Doug.
No, I would just say, at least from a system design perspective, I know that energy and making sure that modes are designed in where you can consume less energy when they're not required. Things like radars and things that certainly consume a lot of stuff from ship energy sources, if that's sort of the nature of the problem. But it is absolutely something that we take into account in the design of systems, is how much energy do they require.
Yeah, ma'am, I'll just tell you, I think the propulsion plants that we have for our carriers and submarines, we're going to continue that, with that technology into the future. And right now, I don't see a large deviation on the surface side either, as we think about what the drivetrains and the propulsion plants look like. Certainly the frigate that's already in construction, but when you think about, DDG-X and even some of the other platforms, I don't see us varying too much off of those propulsion plants.
On the Marine Corps side, as we look to act as a stand-in force and use expeditionary advanced bases, it's really going to challenge our logistics system. And a lot of our logistics is moving fuel and energy around the battlefield. So as we look at our future vehicles in particular, I talked to the tactical wheeled vehicle folks who build our JLTVs and our ACVs and those kind of vehicles. We're looking for opportunities for hybridization of energy, electrification, anything that can reduce the amount of fuel we need to move around the battlefield over those long distances.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
Yeah, good morning, gentlemen. Dave Hart from Deloitte. The other day on Sunday, all of us saw at the Super Bowl a 30-second energizing Navy recruiting commercial, which kind of surprised me, frankly, but I hope it certainly pays off, because we know that we have folks we need to recruit into the military side. But collectively, I think you gentlemen own probably the bulk of the civilian workforce in the Department of the Navy or the Coast Guard, respectively. And I'm curious what efforts are underway in terms of recruiting, replenishing, and ensuring that the civilian workforce remains both viable and healthy.
Yeah. Hey, Dave, I'll jump in here. So we've got, across NAVSEA, it's an enterprise-wide effort to get after the recruiting goals. And what we're really, leveraging lessons learned across the enterprise. Our warfare centers, again, really good hiring, processes in place out there. So making use of that. Also engaging with private industry, quite frankly, and the best practices, right? And so, working with your team at Deloitte, we've got a couple other companies that we're working with to really kind of garner, hey, what's out there across industry that we can leverage? So that's kind of the way we're getting after it right now.
But any last comment before we get the hook?
I think we've got time for one last question.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Yes, Tom Graham from NGAP Corporation. One of the things that the themes throughout a lot of the sessions yesterday, today, and at other conferences that I've attended over the years is the challenge and a conflict between desire, process, bureaucracy, and outcome. The alignment of those four topics. If you had, and this is for everyone on the panel, if you had one sentence or one phrase or something that you could use to get from the acquisition community in your help toward your desired outcomes, what would that be?
When I picked up my third star, I had a good friend call me, and he gave me the best advice I ever had. He said, don't wait to be a 3-star. You're going to go in there, you're going to run naval aviation with the Air Boss, with OpNav. Don't wait to be a 3-star. To all my PMs, and this is what I say to them, we have processes, we have policies, we have DoD instructions. Your end state is to get capability out to the warfighter when they need it at a cost we can afford. Get after it. Don't wait to be a 3-star. Get after it. And then, for those of you who are old enough to watch Oprah Winfrey, there's a quote that she used to say, don't take no from somebody who can't give you a yes. And if we can get that mindset, that behavior, so most of the discussion we had on the industry panel this morning was about contracting, and it's about the frozen middle. So to the PMs, and this is what they hear from NAVAIR, and I talked to a lot of the industry PMs as well, push the system. Our focus is making sure we get capability out to the warfighter. What is it going to take for us to do that?
I guess it's a great great response to close this out on.
Admiral McCoy, panel members, thanks for your insights today. And to the audience, thanks for your excellent questions. This was a really worthwhile discussion. I'd ask you before you go to lunch to open up the West app and please rate the panel discussion, leave some comments so we can improve for next year. And on behalf of AFCEA International and the Naval Institute, we have a book for each of our panel members, Mastering the Art of Command, Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, and Victory in the Pacific by Trent Hone. Gentlemen, thank you, and please join me in a round of applause for our panel. Sir, thanks.